Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever wished for a clear blueprint, a real workable plan for becoming a better person? Well, today we're going to explore a pretty profound idea from a 17th century theologian, John Owen. He argued that this blueprint isn't a set of rules at all, but a person, someone we can actually model our lives after. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at that universal human search for a pattern for life. Then we'll get into Owen's specific blueprint, what it looks like on the inside and how it shows up on the outside. After that, we'll cover the tools he says we need for the job, and finally, what it all means to actually become the blueprint.
All right, let's start with a question that people have wrestled with for, well, forever. Is there a reliable pattern, a definitive blueprint that we can follow for real, meaningful personal growth?
So many people have offered answers, right? From ancient philosophers to modern self-help gurus. But John Owen, he believed the ultimate answer wasn't found in a system, but in modeling our lives after a perfect example. So here's his core idea. He says the life of Christ is the ultimate prototype, the original, uncorrupted design for what it means to be fully human. He basically saw it as the gold standard, the thing against which we should measure our own character.
And this brings us to the key concept, something Owen calls conformity to Christ. Now, this isn't a one-and-done decision. He saw it as a lifelong project, this active, ongoing process of shaping everything, our inner life, our outward actions, to match that original blueprint.
Owen frames this whole thing as a choice between two competing models, almost like two versions of ourselves. He argues that we all start out reflecting the image of the first Adam, our flawed, earthy default setting. The goal, he says, is to consciously renovate ourselves toward the second Adam, that heavenly pattern that represents the restored, ideal blueprint. So let's move on and see how this all gets built. For Owen, this transformation, it doesn't start with just changing your behavior. No, it has to begin much deeper, with the actual architecture of your soul.
And he's incredibly direct about this. He says the absolute foundation is an internal change. It's about cultivating what he calls habitual grace and holiness. Think of it like developing a kind of moral muscle memory, or maybe installing a whole new operating system for your character, where goodness becomes the default response.
Now, Owen gives a pretty stark warning here. He argues that if you just try to perform good deeds without that genuine change of heart, your actions become totally empty. They're just formality, or even worse, hypocrisy and superstition. So the goal of this whole inner renovation project is really profound. It's about restoring that original design, aligning our deepest desires with the blueprint's principles. That way, any good we do on the outside is a genuine, authentic expression of who we're actually becoming on the inside.
Okay, so if the change really starts on the inside, how does it actually show up in the real world? Well, Owen gets very specific here, and he outlines the virtues that are the outward expression of that inner transformation.
First up, he lists these virtues that reflect a kind of divine goodness. And you'll notice these aren't flashy or heroic in the typical sense. They're the quiet strengths, meekness, true humility, active kindness, and a really deep-seated patience with other people. And then he shifts focus to how this character shows up under pressure. He highlights virtues for the hard times, things like self-denial, a willingness to endure difficulty, and especially the strength to face hardship without lashing out or becoming bitter.
Owen then uses this powerful, almost shocking metaphor to really drive the point home. He says that to claim you followed this blueprint while at the same time being proud or angry or envious, well, that's the ultimate hypocrisy. It's like cheering for the architect while you're actively demolishing their work.
So this all sounds incredibly challenging, right? A complete internal and external renovation. So what tools does Owen say are necessary to even begin this demanding process of transformation? How do we build it? He boils it down to two essential requirements. First, something he calls spiritual light. You can think of this like developing a new kind of taste, learning to see the genuine beauty in virtues like humility and patience, things our culture often just overlooks. And second, love. It's not enough to see them as good ideas, you have to come to genuinely desire these qualities above all else. To explain how this process works, Owen uses this really powerful metaphor. He says the gospel account of Christ's life is like a mirror. By looking intently at the blueprint in this mirror, we are gradually transformed to reflect that very same image. The act of seeing itself becomes the catalyst for changing. All right, let's bring this all together. What does this lifelong project of becoming the blueprint actually look like in our day-to-day lives?
Owen simplifies the daily practice into two ongoing duties, almost like a character workout. The first part is subtraction, a constant, vigilant effort to identify and remove any thought or action that makes us unlike the blueprint. The second part is addition, the continual effort to cultivate and strengthen every one of the virtues that make us like it.
So here's the crucial takeaway. For Owen, faith is not a passive belief system. It's an active, intentional design project. It is the conscious work of conforming your entire self, your thoughts, your actions, your very character, to the pattern of this ultimate blueprint.
And this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Regardless of the specific framework, what does it mean for any of us to have a living, breathing blueprint for our life? A person or an ideal that so fully captures our admiration that it actively shapes who we are and who we are striving to become.